In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a custom brush, but we will also take a closer look at some of the settings for brushes and also the brush presets panel. So first of all, let me just explain what we are about to do. We are preparing to create a chain brush, something like that, that can be drawn automatically and of course much more precisely than what I just did there. So what we have to do for this is to draw some of the segments and then define it as a custom brush, which then can create a repeated pattern when we are drawing with the brush tool. So first of all, let me just explain that we have the presets option here, the brush presets panel, which, if in case you can't see, it's under the window menu, and there you will find brush presets. Now here you will see a couple of default settings, but you can also open other options from the panel menu. So you will find there all kinds of different brush categories that you can open up. And as an example, we have some square brushes. If I open that up, I can add to my current brushes. So if I choose append, they will be added to my current brushes. So the default round brush, which we have in Photoshop, can be replaced with a different brush tip shape, like this one here. Let's say I'm choosing the biggest one, and I'll just increase my brush size. So you can see now I'm using a square brush tip shape. There is also another very important option, the spacing, which will be in the brush panel. So you can either click on this icon here to toggle to brush panel, or you can just simply select the brush panel. And also this is something you can find in the window menu. So once you have the brush panel open, within that you will find the spacing option. If you increase spacing, you will get actual squares next to each other, because it just creates so much space that the brush won't be continuous or won't look continuous. But then of course, if we reduce the spacing, we can even create a completely fluid and smooth line, which actually looks even better than the default option, which was using 25% spacing between the brush tips while drawing. The same applies to round brushes as well. So if I use a round brush with the default spacing, if I use a bigger brush, you will see it even more, that it actually has these little bumps around the edges, and that can be avoided by reducing the spacing down to 1%, because then you will have a much more fluid line without any bumps in it. And I actually want to use this setting because for this custom brush that I'm going to create, this will be necessary. I'm just going to fill my background with white by pressing Command Backspace or Control Backspace on PC. And then I'm going to hold down the Shift key with a big round brush, and I am going to click and drag to create a horizontal round shape like this. Now this is what we are going to use for the chain, but I would like to delete from this. So I switch to the eraser tool, which is not far from the brush tool. The shortcut for that is E. And the eraser works almost exactly like the brush, but it's going to take away from whatever you have on your layer. So in this case, as you can see, we can again set up the same options like reduce the spacing. And currently I'm having almost the same size brush. So if I hold down the Shift key, I can take away from this one. So I could create a chain like that. If I feel like the actual chain itself is too thin, I can undo this last step and maybe use a smaller brush. Something, let's say like that. So I'm going to just repeat the same step once again. And that can be one segment of the chain. Of course, there are so many other ways of drawing this. We could use shapes as well, like vector shapes, which I'm going to talk about in the next video. And I'm going to actually show you doing something similar with vector shapes might be sometimes easier. But for now, just to practice using brushes and the eraser tool as well, let's continue doing the same technique. So I'm going to do the next segment. I switch back to the brush tool and I make my brush smaller. But before I draw, I'm going to create a separate layer, and you will see why I do that. So I just click on the new layer icon here in the layers panel, and then I can hold down again the Shift key. I just try to align my brush in the center and then click and drag to define the next segment, which we see from the side. That's why we only see the edge of it. But thanks to the fact that I've done this on a separate layer, I can actually duplicate this quickly and put it on the left side. So I'm going to use the move tool. The move tool is here in the toolbar, and then I hold down the Alt key and the Shift together to duplicate and keep it in the same position. So let's just align it somewhere there. So you see that created an additional layer for us. But then I'm going to use the selection tool, the rectangular marquee tool, make a selection of this and cut it somewhere around here by just pressing backspace. I can delete that detail. I select my other layer, the previous one, make another selection here, cut it around somewhere there, and once again press backspace to delete. So that can be a repeated segment for the chain that we are going to do. And I am just going to flatten my layers into one because I don't need these to be separate elements anymore. So I can go to the layers panel and choose flatten image. So all these layers will be flattened into one layer on the background. So now what we can do is to make a selection of this brush. So I'm just going to select it using the rectangular marquee tool, something like that. And then I can go to the edit menu and choose define brush preset. Once I choose that, we can see that that's the link that we created, the little segment of the chain. So let's just call this round chain brush. So then I click OK. So that is saved. And if I switch back to my brush tool, but first I deselect this selection. So I switch back to the brush tool. I can already see it on my cursor. But if I start drawing with this, it doesn't work at the moment because we have to change a couple of things here. So first of all, I'm going to make my brush smaller because at the moment it's too big. And then I'm going to increase the spacing until I can actually see the pattern in the chain. So something like that. Let's see if I draw now. That starts to look better, but at the moment it's not repeating it. Maybe I'm just going to increase the spacing slightly. If I draw straight line by holding down the Shift key, that looks already quite good. Maybe the link in the middle, the one that's rotated, is too small, so I'm going to just increase the spacing slightly. Let's see once again. So having more spacing, that's a little bit too much now. It's not connected anymore. That's it. That's like looks quite good. So using these settings are going to be just fine, but we have to be able to move this brush around. So I want it to follow the direction when I'm drawing. So if I go to the shape dynamics, there I can find the angle option. And for the angle, I can change the control to direction. And by using an even smaller brush, if I now start drawing, you can see we have almost a perfect chain effect now. Of course, this could be refined even further to make sure that there's no broken pieces. But mainly, the smaller the brush gets, the better the connection will look. So you can see in even smaller brush, it works even better. So it is useful to save a big chain, but then reduce the brush size. And even this brush size, if I zoom closer, you can see it's not that small. So it can be used in drawings and any kind of different compositions, like the one that we had with the dragon, where we could use this to add some chains for this dragon here. And then we want the dragon to be chained down, and we can just start drawing like that, and then have the chain going down. There's another chain on the other side, and so on and so forth. So you can imagine the application of creating these custom brushes and how useful they are. And just as an example, coming back to this document here, the same way I created the round chain element, we could use the panel once again to switch to the square brush. So I select the square brush there. And with this one, I could do the same thing. Just draw once again, holding down Shift key, like something like that. And either use the eraser tool or just switch to the white color by using the little arrow here in the toolbar, or press X. Make your brush smaller and then decide how thick you want the chain to be, and then draw that element. Once again, press X to switch back to black, and then draw another element here, and so on and so forth. So you can imagine how quick and easy it is to set up all kinds of different custom brushes. It's really up to you and your imagination what type of brushes you want to create. But of course, you can download so many custom brushes from the internet. And let me just show you some of my custom brushes here that I have on the computer. I have things like this one, which is like a grunge brush, and I just make my brush size smaller so I can show you. And of course, all these custom brushes can use any type of colors. So they not only work with black, they can work with any color that you wish to use. And then I have also other brush presets here, like these ones as well. Again, it's still grunge or dirt effects. And once again, I can switch back to black, or I can choose any gray colors as well. So you see how this brush looks as well, which is great for texturing and add some rust on surfaces whenever you paint. If you are a Creative Cloud user, you can download brushes from the Creative Cloud assets. Just go to Creative Cloud, choose Assets, and under the Market, you will be able to find these free assets created by other designers. So let's just try one of these. So there's a nice one here, like this one. If I click on Download, I can choose where I want to save it. I can even create a new library and just call it Brushes. Once I have that selected, I can click on Continue, and that will be downloaded. So once I go back to the Libraries panel, and within Libraries, I will be able to choose the one that we just saved, Brushes, and there you have the Splatter watercolor brush. So once I select that, let's just make this brush size smaller. So I reduce it, it's at the moment really big. I'm going to also clear my canvas so we can try it out. That looks very nice. Let's just change our color to something a bit more cheerful, and then we can very quickly pick different colors and try this out. And as a bonus tip, let me show you a random rotation option. In the brush settings, if you go to Shape Dynamics, you can choose Angle Jitter. Jitter is always a way to randomize a property, and if you increase it to 100%, that means it will always be different. So that means if I click with this brush, every time I click, it will rotate this splatter in a different direction. And going back to the settings, we can even randomize the color. So if I go to Color Dynamics, we can randomize the hue, which means every time I click, it will always be a different color as well. So I can click now, and you can see each time I click, it will create a different color with different rotation, and so on and so forth. If I click and drag, it also changes this while I'm drawing. So I don't even have to lift my mouse. Every time it creates a splat, it automatically changes its color and rotation. And of course, you could even change the size of it. If I go back to Shape Dynamics, I can also add Size Jitter, which will then not only change the rotation and color, but also the size of the splatter. And this is really still just scratching the surface of what is available when you work with brushes in Photoshop, and especially once you start customizing them through the brush panel and creating your custom brushes. But of course, this is not the only way to draw in Photoshop, because we also have vector shapes. And drawing with them is a completely different technique. It's more like constructing using geometric shapes. And I'm going to show you exactly that in the next video.